It is clear that we are currently facing a global crisis, at least in my opinion, the biggest crisis of our generation, and one which nobody, maybe Bill Gates apart, saw coming and had in any way planned for. Not even the most optimist of us present can today deny that it's no longer business as usual, and we need to adjust and adapt the way we interact, work, and do business. Holding this discussion virtually is a clear example, one which I would have never dreamt of until a couple of days ago. As you can see, it poses a number of challenges, technological, with all the sound and all that, but also the fact that it's being done by us working from home with our kids in the next room. So if you hear our kids shouting at any time during this presentation, we obviously ask you to apologize and to ignore it. I must say that the list of housekeeping rules is much longer than that I ever had for any presentation I've done. First and foremost, I'd like to ask you all to keep your microphones on mute and also your camera. We are obviously keen on your participation and interaction. As some of you have noted, there is the chat panel where you could raise questions, and we also intend to open the floor to some questions at a later stage. Given the number of participants and also the difficulty of coordinating it, I would still highly recommend that we use the chat panel whenever you need to raise a question. The subject matter is also rather sensitive. And with the current platform, and also the fact that we are currently recording this presentation, it may not be possible to anonymize your questions. We are therefore leaving our contact details on screen, and we encourage you to reach out to us if there are any questions or any points you would like to discuss offline or which you want to follow up. I think on the point of questions, I must say that it's going to be difficult with respect to certain questions for us to provide a clear-cut position. The rules and guidelines are limited, if any, and the measures and responses being put forward by government and authorities are evolving almost on a daily basis. So again, you'll probably be hearing a lot of "it depends," or "this is my view" or "our internal view," or similar caveats that we lawyers like to use. Obviously, from our end, we have been in discussions with the DIER, and we'll share some of these points, clarifications with you as we go away. As I said before, the session is also being recorded and will be available after the session. So, to get things started, today's discussion will focus on employment and other legal and non-legal workforce considerations, which are obviously have become topical given the current state of circumstances. The fiscal measures and incentives will be addressed during tomorrow's session. I was expecting a number of you to cut as soon as I say that we'll be addressing the fiscal measures tomorrow. That being said, from an employment perspective, in my opinion, it's impressive how we have, in a matter of days, gone from discussing some health and safety matters relating to COVID. Example, the need to clean and sanitize the workplace. Can we stop employees from traveling abroad? To issues relating to quarantine and what does it mean? Forced leave. And in certain cases, unfortunately, also termination and redundancies. These aspects all raise a number of difficult interpretational issues, and we will try to discuss and opine on them during this session. Also, what we have been seeing is that the need for employers to take immediate action, also coupled with the variety of challenges that this pandemic has brought about, cash flow, corporate governance, a variety of tax measures, insolvencies, has resulted in certain important considerations being overlooked. And during this hour or so, we will try to raise or highlight a number of these still relevant and important points. That's it from me. We'll start with the recently introduced quarantine leave provisions, and I'll leave it to Berta to take us through.
Yes, thanks, Mark. Okay, so let's begin with quarantine leave. As Mark said, it has very recently been introduced into Maltese law through Legal Notice 62 of 2020, so very recently. And this legal notice has amended an existing piece of legislation, so the minimum special leave entitlement regulations. These regulations already regulated leave such as sick leave, bereavement leave, birth leave, marriage leave, injury leave. However, now we have a new type of leave into our law. Okay, so the most important question really is, what is quarantine leave? So the legal notice defines it. It defines it as leave to be granted to the employee without loss of wages, crucial point, in those instances where the employee is legally obliged to abide by a quarantine order, which order confines the employee to a certain area or to certain premises. Therefore, employees should be entitled to be granted such paid quarantine leave by their employer for any period of quarantine as may be determined. Such quarantine leave entitlement applies irrespective of whether the employment is regulated by a specific wage council regulation. So whether there is a wage regulation order regulating the sector or not, quarantine leave may still be applicable. Okay, the law allows the employer to request proof, so it's not just a matter of a unilateral request by the employee, but actually the employer can ask for documentation that the event has actually occurred. I don't know, for instance, one could ask for a copy of the order if there is one in writing, or some other proof to show there is the actual requirement for quarantine. As with any other piece of legislation, if anyone is found guilty of breaching this legislation, it's an offense and there are also fines. Going back, I think, to the crucial point of the definition of quarantine, our law provides that the person must abide by a quarantine order which confines the employee to a certain area or to certain premises. In this respect, I think there has been an evolution of this point. So as probably most of you are aware, initially there was a specified list of countries where any person arriving from those countries was bound to submit to a 14-day period of quarantine. This has now been extended to travel from any country. So any person arriving in Malta from any country must submit to a 14-day period of quarantine. Importantly, this also applies to persons who live in the same residence, and this is an important consideration for employers. There is one exception, though, I need to mention it in the general rule, in that the Superintendent of Public Health has, in her discretion, the power to suspend a quarantine order with respect to a particular person if that person provides an essential service. But this is something which is obviously determined ad hoc. Okay, so we're saying quarantine should be strictly adhered to. And in fact, very recently, a large number of legal notices have been introduced. Some of them have imposed fines. So as we've heard in the media, there are fines imposed. The fine initially was of 1,000 and is now of 3,000 for whoever breaches quarantine. So as we're saying, in a very, very short span of time, a relatively large number of legal notices have been issued, which have widened the scope of quarantine. And in fact, now we also have regulations with respect to possible local transmissions. So we have a legal notice, very recent, which basically sets out that any person who comes in contact with a person diagnosed with COVID-19 must submit oneself to a 14-day period of quarantine immediately upon receiving an oral or written order. So quarantine has now been extended also to persons who have come into contact with diagnosed persons. Again, there's an exception for persons providing essential services, but this is an exception to the general rule. I think one final point on self-isolation. So we've had the regulations on quarantine, and quite a number of legal notices have been issued with respect to quarantine, as we're seeing. However, there's also, in a recent legal notice 99, of a couple of days ago, self-isolation has also been introduced. So this order, in very short, very briefly, states that any person who is actually diagnosed as suffering from COVID-19 infectious disease shall immediately submit himself to self-isolation. And in this case, there is no time period. So obviously, he must remain in isolation until the order is revoked. So it is an indefinite order to remain in self-isolation. In this case, the fine is much higher, understandably. So the fine is 10,000 euros for every breach of self-isolation. And once again, even persons living in the same residence are obliged to follow self-isolation. From an employment perspective, one could ask whether this is also a form of quarantine, because the order refers to self-isolation. Does this mean that also quarantine is included? What am I saying? Well, I think it is clear from the perspective of the person who's diagnosed. So if a person is diagnosed as suffering from coronavirus and then he must self-isolate, understandably, although the law doesn't say it, but I would argue that this would be a clear case of sick leave at this point. This person has been diagnosed of a very serious disease, and it's a logical conclusion. However, not so logical then is the question of what about the family members? So those persons who live with a person who is self-isolated, they are not necessarily unwell. Very likely they are well at that point in time, but they are obliged to self-isolate. Looking back at the definition of quarantine, one could say that these persons have been confined to a certain area. So I would argue that they possibly could be on quarantine leave. Such classification has a bearing also, as you probably are aware, with respect to the quarantine grant, which may be claimed. However, the law is not clear, and maybe some confirmations could be sought, but I would say it's quite a logical. So although a number of legal notices have been issued today regulating quarantine, some issues remain very unclear. As time goes by, the concept of quarantine in our law may be widened even further. So there are constant discussions going on, and they could easily be widened further. For instance, what if Malta goes on an official lockdown? In such event, will the provisions relating to quarantine apply? Or can we expect further provisions being introduced? Could we say that basically most of the workforce at that point in time would be on quarantine? In truth, we'd expect more legislation to be enacted. Whatever it is, in that case, you'd have part of the workforce who would not be able to carry out any work from home. However, a substantial part would probably be able to work remotely. And here is where I think regulation on teleworking comes into play and becomes even more crucial. And in fact, I think Sharon will now be delving into the concept of teleworking in some detail.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Berta, for the introduction. As Berta said, I will be taking you through certain aspects of teleworking. Teleworking seems to have become the norm for many of us lately, at least for those who can work from home. I'm sure that by now you're all aware of the call that the government has issued for the submission of applications from those employers who have set up their employees to work from home. The grant consists of a payment of 45% of the costs incurred between the 15th of February and the 8th of May. The amount is, however, capped at €500 per teleworking agreement and a total limit of €4,000 per undertaking. Costs need to relate to the purchasing or leasing of computer equipment, as well as a communication solution such as VPN. In order to be eligible for this grant, employees should not have had an active teleworking agreement prior to the 15th of February. Applicants must, however, produce a signed teleworking agreement commencing not earlier than the 15th of February, besides certain other declarations. Such declarations consist of a document signed by an employee confirming that he is solely taking the responsibility for the hardware and software, as well as copy of invoices or, if leased, of the lease agreement. The call closes on the 8th of May. It's been recently extended, I believe, on the 23rd of March, from the 30th of March, Monday coming, to Friday, 8th of May. So what does this entail? This means that to be eligible for the grant, employees should not have been working on a regular basis from home prior to the 15th of February this year. The term regular basis is not intended to cover those situations where employees would have randomly carried on some work from home or continued their work after, say, leaving office and would have continued their work home. It refers rather to a situation where teleworking is structured, integrated within the schedule of an employee. So employers whose employees carried on work here and there from home prior to the 15th February should not be precluded from being eligible to apply for this grant. However, as I said, in order to apply under this scheme, it is necessary that employers would have entered into a teleworking agreement with their employees. Such agreement cannot have a date earlier than the 15th of February, or else employers would not be able to claim under the said grant. It is important to note that even if employers do not intend to benefit from this scheme, that they appreciate and understand that it is still necessary, according to Maltese law, for them to enter into an agreement with their employees if they are going to be working from home on a regular basis. The inclusion in a contract of employment, as we typically find, of a provision stating that the employer may ask employees to carry out work from an alternate location other than their place of work, in itself is not enough. Simply providing employees with a laptop and VPN connection is neither enough, as the law expressly provides that an arrangement has to be made in writing. The law that I'm talking about is the Teleworking National Standard Order, and this lays down several conditions which must be specifically included and naturally observed. These terms, if not included, would still, sooner or later, they would still need to be discussed and agreed to with employees. It's one thing having one employee or a few workers working remotely, and it's another thing having the majority of your workforce working from home. So having conditions clearly stipulated in an agreement by which employees would be guided and employers would know what to expect from their employees, not only would be in compliance with the law, but would also make logical sense from an operational perspective. Such terms include provisions relating to information on the equipment supplied by employers. Would the ownership of such equipment, for example, be vested in the employee or in the employer? Would the responsibility for maintenance and the liability in case of loss or damage be vested in the employer and the employer? So it would be making sense to have such information contained in the agreement per se. The law provides also that the allocation of costs needs to be stated, what do we do in of course, such as heating and electricity? Some things we don't think of, but having a majority of your workforce working from home, certain things start coming to mind, and they would start thinking like, who's going to be responsible for all the electricity that I'm consuming? Not to think of other things that we usually don't use when we're at the office, but we start using from home. Another aspect that would need to be taken into account would be the amount of time to be spent when working from home as against taking the time spent from the office. If any, obviously, the exigencies of the business would need to be taken account of. Any schedule by which an employee is bound to work, as well as a description of the work to be carried out from home. Working from an office is one thing, while working from home would be another. So it would make sense to fit in perhaps other duties that would make sense when an employee will be required to work from home. Naturally, this would depend on the position, and any new duties would still need to be compatible with the role that the employee performs. The law provides also that there has to be a reference in the agreement to the department and the persons to whom employees would need to report to when they are working from home. We've got some music as well going on. The law also provides that there has to be provisions relating to privacy. I'm sure that we all appreciate how important it is not to intrude unnecessarily into an employee's personal life. We will be touching upon this matter in more detail later on, as well as monitoring system in order to be able to implement a monitoring system. Unless an agreement provides it in writing, then no employer can implement such a system. So it is very important to ensure that this would be included. However, there are certain limitations in the law that would need to be respected in this regard as well. The law provides that notice of termination of the arrangement should also be included. While the law provides for already preset notification periods, it allows for the employer and the employee to agree on other different notice periods. Of course, in this situation that we are living right now, I mean, I don't think that it would make sense for anyone to terminate the teleworking arrangement before it would be deemed safe enough for employees to resume their normal duties at the office. So that would need to be catered for also in the agreement. The agreement would also need to contain a reference to the right of the employees to revert to their pre-telework post. That is a right that they would need to have in writing. The order also contemplates the responsibility on the part of the employers to compensate employees for communication costs directly incurred in connection with teleworking. So that cannot be shifted onto employees. The employer needs to assume that responsibility. We feel that besides these issues that are listed in the order itself, employers should take note of other issues besides those that I mentioned. One that comes to mind, and which is, I think, one of the more important issues, is the health and safety issues. Employers must appreciate that their duty concerning health and safety is not suspended just by the fact that employees are no longer, or for the majority part of the time, are no longer working from their place of work, but are working remotely. In this respect, it makes sense to ensure that employees working from home are working from a safe and secure environment. Under normal circumstances, it would also make sense for an employer to reserve the right to inspect the home working areas, not to intrude, but to ensure that it is adequate and in line with health and safety standards. However, I'm sure you all agree with me that right now this is not the best time to start practicing this right. Working remotely may also have a negative impact on employees' well-being. My colleague Claudine will touch on this subject later on. Other challenges and risks that employers could face with employees working on a large scale, working from home, are the risks associated with misuse or loss of information, breaches of confidentiality, and data protection. It is important for employers to have in place policies and procedures that ensure that such risks are mitigated. However, I will leave it up to my colleagues, Leanne and Claire, to tackle these issues in some further detail. Should you wish to get more information about teleworking, I suggest that you do visit our website. We have some more information there. I thank you all for listening, and I wish you to keep safe. On to you, Leanne. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. As Sharon mentioned briefly, the risks with teleworking are related to also the confidentiality aspect, privacy and data protection. When carrying out our work at the office, as you know, even the structure itself gives us a sense of professionalism, even the fact that we have to keep a clear desk at the office and we have appropriate bins around to throw away confidential material. That gives us a structured environment, and we are geared and able to be able to carry out our way with the required confidentiality and privacy. But now, since many employees are working from home, these requirements of confidentiality and privacy are still applicable. Given that there is a sort of absence in the structures, there might be a sort of a lax approach being taken by the employee. So it's important that they are reminded that these principles should still hold when they are working away from the office. And in practice, what does this mean? So employees should not be discussing matters which are of a confidential nature with people who are not involved. It's like I'm stating the obvious, but at these times when there's a dilution of the structure, I mean, it's good to make sure that these points are at the fore. At the office, as I mentioned, we keep a clear desk. But again, once we're working from home, we have to ensure that we don't leave any confidential material lying about, even just simple notes on a piece of paper. These have to be kept in a secure manner and also disposed of appropriately. And now we're taking calls via video conference and also client calls from the home. These should be taken again in private. Again, I feel that it's like we're stating the obvious, but it's important to keep these on our mind when we're working away from the office. These aspects of privacy and confidentiality lead us to data protection. As you know, data protection, it has been around for many years now, and in the past few years, we've had the introduction of the GDPR. It's a good opportunity to make sure that we are in line with the GDPR, and also now ensuring that it also covers these aspects of teleworking. So it's a very good opportunity to see if there are any gaps now, because maybe we're working a bit differently than what we have been used to in the past. So now I'll be going through a few aspects from a data protection perspective. Just to ensure that as we are working from home and the employees are working from home, that the businesses are equipped to ensure that they are also meeting the data protection obligations. Sharon went through the Teleworking National Standard Order. That order also, as she briefly pointed out, mentions aspects of data protection. And in fact, it has provision within it, which provides that an employer is required to take appropriate measures to ensure the protection of data used and processed by the teleworker. But what does this mean in practice? What should the employer be doing? An employer at this stage should ensure that there are adequate security measures in place. For example, if a teleworker has been given a laptop, a company laptop to use remotely, that the appropriate security measures are in place on that laptop. If there is encryption, for example, or maybe password protection, depending on the needs of the business, there should be the appropriate security measures going hand in hand with that. Another example would be if the individuals are using shared folders online. As much as possible, we should still be thinking about limiting access. Only people who actually need to access certain folders which have confidential data should be given access to it. Even this should be kept in mind even when people are working away from the office. So limiting access, that's another example of how you can have a security measure in place. The telework NSO also requires the employer to inform the teleworker of the data protection provisions and measures taken by the employer to ensure there is data protection. Now, how can this be done? Typically, what we see is that employers provide training for their employees on the GDPR. if this is not possible, the employer should think of other means of how we can pass on the knowledge to his employees. Obviously, this would depend to a large extent on the nature of the business and also the particular circumstances. But it is a requirement that comes from the law that the teleworker must be informed of the provisions relating to data protection. The employer is also required to inform of any restrictions on the use of IT equipment, internet, and other IT tools, as well as any sanction in case of non-compliance. This brings me to the concept of the company policies and procedures. As you know, most organizations would have their specific company policies and procedures in place. It's a good opportunity now to go through them and see if there are any gaps with respect to teleworking, as I already mentioned. Now I will be highlighting a few policies and procedures which are linked, which can be taken in this context. But of course, again, keep in mind that different organizations have different circumstances to consider. So it's obviously would have to be tailored depending on your particular needs. So just to begin with a first example of a policy, to have a clear policy in respect of the use of personal devices. So can the employees use their own pen drive at home or printers? Food for thought. Policies in relation to company devices. With regards to personal devices, keep in mind that, as we said, there have to be appropriate security measures in place. So if an employee is using his printer or his pen drive or anything else, does that have the adequate security measures? It is in place. It is unlikely that they would be encrypted, for example. So a safe measure would be that of restricting employees from using their own devices. On the other hand, though, obviously, employees would be using the company devices, and with regards particularly in this context of teleworking to portable devices, the employer has to ensure that these devices are adequately secured, as we already mentioned. So examples would be encryption or password protection. And in this case also, employers might also want to remind their employees that company devices should be used solely for work purposes. And I extend this also to the internet. So if I am using a company laptop, I should use it only to carry out my work, and that includes browsing the internet. I should browse the internet for other purposes, Facebook, whatever, through my personal laptop and not use the company laptop to do that. So it's having a clear distinction of what is of private use and what is a company use. Obviously, over the coming days, and we have seen already many companies take this step, and many people are working from home. It's good, I think, another way of helping the situation would be of setting up an IT team to be able to manage or engaging external IT providers to manage to assist the people working from home remotely. So that would also ensure that the work is being done as flexible as possible and using the appropriate tools available. And also this would avoid the risk of having somebody try and fix a problem, an IT issue at home, and they wouldn't maybe have the knowledge to do so, which could ultimately result in more complications. Another policy which is worth having at this stage, particularly in the context of teleworking, is whether the company allows for people to take documentation in the form of hard copies out of the office. I mean, as you know, this can have a very big risk. I mean, if the information of a confidential nature is lost, misplaced, or even stolen, it can have very serious repercussions. So generally what we'd see is there'd be a rule that this is not possible, but there are exceptions always, as you know. So in those cases where employees have to take documentation home, there have to be adequate security measures in place. And I like to see this as a sort of the life cycle of the document. You have to ensure that the document, which obviously has this confidential information, is treated in a secure manner from when it leaves the office till the moment it is disposed of. So this the security measure has to be in place from the journey home till it's thrown into the appropriate bin. Exactly, and this could also be another policy. A procedure to follow, which is worth pointing out, is the procedure in the event of loss or theft of confidential and personal data. This would allow if there's a procedure to follow, the employees would know what to do in such a situation, and there would be less of lost time trying to figure out what has to be done. So indirectly, it would also assist the employer to comply with the provisions of the GDPR, because as you know, in terms of law, there is a personal data breach as defined in the law. The employer would have to act within a specified amount of time in order to inform the supervisory authority, and also would have to document the steps taken in the event of that personal data breach. So having a procedure set out and shared with the employees would help them act fast and in order to try and reduce any damage which could ensue from having the information lost or even stolen. The teleworker also is required to abide by the provisions of the GDPR and abide by the measures of the employer. And this too comes out of the telework NSO, which Sharon and I have covered in this presentation. So here again, I would throw the ball again on the employer to make sure that his staff are aware and have been informed of the law and also the policies and procedures. I mean, it's a good time to remind the staff that these policies are in place and also update them. It's a very good opportunity to make sure that the policies are updated to cater for this new environment we are working in, to ensure that if there are any gaps or areas which are completely missing, because before maybe it was an exception to have someone working from home rather than the norm, which we are seeing now. It's a good time to think about this, I would say. Now my colleague Claire will be taking you through the salient principles which come out from the GDPR. I mean, and in a way to conclude this area on data protection. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. So I'm just going to go to some legal texts because I think we can all agree that trying to adapt to these complications brings about a lot of immediate action, quick thinking, and quick decisions being taken. And it's very easy to overlook the data protection aspect of things because it's the last thing on everyone's mind at the moment, probably. However, since what is everyone trying to do is trying to keep their businesses running and functioning, it's not an ideal thing to do to overlook certain principles if there is still the risk to face fines as a consequence in the end. So I'm just going to mention some key principles which will aid in quick decisions and the things to keep in mind so that when quick decisions are taken, we can sort of like give them a quick thought just to avoid having gaps at the end. The first and, in my opinion, the most important and most practical principle is that of proportionality. So every decision which is taken, every new measure which is introduced, every new data processing activity which is introduced in order to cater for the situation has to be proportionate to the purpose for which it is being processed. So it has to be proportionate between the privacy and the right to privacy of the data subject, and also the purpose for which it is being processed. And in this scenario, we might be introducing new measures for a various number of reasons, and these reasons may also lead to our health. So I think keeping a good balance between the two is key in this situation. Another thing also is that all decisions and new measures which are being implemented, like even if we're just introducing telework or even if it's just a small measure which is being introduced as an aid to facilitate the situation that we have with the COVID-19, all decisions and all measures, especially those which include new processing of personal data, need to be appropriately documented. This will help in reducing the risk of having gaps in compliance because the decisions which we would be taking now and maybe the new measures which we would be implementing now would be backed up by reason. For example, I'm just going to try to put things in perspective here. If you have an employer who has taken the decision to introduce a telework arrangement for his employees, most probably such arrangement would result in an increase in data processing. And having such an increase in data processing as part of the company's strategy to handle this pandemic situation will go to show that such increase is only a result and is in fact proportionate to the urgent need to have such measures in place, which ultimately are safeguarding our employees and our health and also our employment at the end. Another thing, even though it may sound impossible at the moment, where it is possible, when there is a new data process which is being introduced, a data protection risk assessment and impact assessment would ideally be carried out before the new process is introduced. Now, although this may not always be possible because, as I have mentioned at the very beginning, things are going very fast and we have to act really quickly. Businesses have to adapt to the current situation, so that is understandable. However, one must keep in mind that in certain circumstances, for example, when the processing is likely to result in a higher risk to the rights and freedoms of the data subject, for example, if there is excessive monitoring, so we're trying to monitor our staff because we're not meeting them every day, we don't get to communicate as well as we used to, and without wanting to, we implement excessive monitoring. That excessive monitoring may result in a requirement to have such a data protection impact and risk assessment in place before. There are situations where the law expressly requires that before such measures are taken, the data protection impact and risk assessments are carried out. So in this case, one should keep that in mind because failure to do so would result in non-compliance at the end. Now, a number of processing activities and other measures may be required to support each other. For example, if we have a teleworking arrangement, which is new, to go with that, to support that new arrangement, we might need to have other measures in place, new measures in place to support that arrangement. Now, these new measures usually will consist of new processing activities, and new measures would require new actions. So what do I mean by this? If I am introducing an electronic timesheet, for example, to support my teleworking staff because now they cannot come to the office and use the palm reader to clock in and clock out, that timesheet is a new process. It's a new data process. And if I have a new data process, I would need a new retention period for that data process. It might even result in me needing to update the retention policy that I have in place already. So we have to keep in mind that even though maybe they are not the things we think of at first, we still have to make sure that they're being documented, and we still have to make sure that everything is being updated as it should be, because at the end, it will help everyone, not just the company from not getting fines, but also everyone would be in line when this is all over, hopefully. Now, just to link to what I was saying, all new procedures and processing activities need to be communicated in a clear and direct manner to employees. Now, this I might be stating the obvious here, but apart from the fact that one of the principles of data protection is that personal data needs to be processed in a transparent manner, I think it's quite useless to have a lot of new measures in place. Everything is introduced to most probably aid our employees, but then our employees are not aware of what they should or shouldn't be doing. So this is very important, even if sometimes it's a bit of an obvious statement. Now, just to end my points here, as we all know, the lawful processing requires having a legal basis to process personal data. Usually in the employment industry, in this sphere, the most common legal bases which are used and which are relied upon are that of consent of the data subject, and where processing is necessary for the performance of a contract, which in this scenario would mainly be the employment contract. However, now that we have new measures and procedures which are being introduced, which sometimes are even introduced overnight, one may find that the legal basis would have to change. So the legal basis we are relying upon will change from that of consent or from that of the performance of the contract. the GDPR does cater for such instances. There are legal bases where we would be processing personal data to safeguard the vital interests of the data subject or another human being, or when we're processing for the performance to protect the public interest. But it is very important that when there is this change, when we're changing from relying on the consent or on the employment contract to actually relying on processing for the public interest, we need to be fully aware of this change. And you must ask, why is there this need to be fully aware? First and foremost, the data subject needs to be informed if there is a change. So if I'm processing someone's personal data for another reason, he needs to be informed. And on top of that, the concept of purpose limitation. So personal data shouldn't be processed for another purpose other than that for which it was collected. So when that purpose changes, we need to be aware because we need to inform the data subject, and also because we need to identify this new legal basis, and we need to document it. So for example, if we have a palm reader at the office and we usually use to record time and attendance, and which we usually is linked to payroll, for example, and now we're using that palm reader to ensure that the visitors at the premises are limited to what is actually required to avoid the spread of the COVID-19, there we have a different purpose for processing. So because there is this change, we need to make the necessary arrangements. So far, we've discussed legal implications of remote working and measures. Now, my colleague Claudine will give some guidance on other aspects organizations should be considering when adopting remote working due to the circumstances.
Thanks, Claire. Good afternoon, everyone. So obviously, the success of remote working isn't just about providing the technology to our employees and having the right agreements and policies, as we've been discussing. In times like these, obviously supporting our people to, first of all, remain productive through remote working, but also helping them to address some of their challenges is going to be imperative. Obviously, these challenges are numerous at the moment. They could include, for example, using the technology to its full potential to remain connected, working with children at home is another one, being concerned about their own health, their loved ones, mental health, as well as social disconnection. You know, people are used to working possibly in an office environment with people around them, and now all of a sudden they need to be working alone at home. So this is a big change and is going to require quite a few things to be in place. I would say the key one, first of all, is strong leadership. Okay, the biggest challenge that I've seen with clients implementing remote working is the shift to new ways of managing people and performance. Okay, you have people telling you, obviously before this came in, I will only allow employees to work remotely once they have earned our trust. My answer to that is the day that employees sign a contract with you, you are trusting them with confidential information, you are trusting them to represent your brand, okay? So you also need to be trusting them to work remotely. What needs to change, however, is the way you are going to be managing their performance. It's not anymore about having employees with your team members who are physically sharing the same office with you that you can monitor, okay? We now need to manage performance more through outcomes, okay, by having targets for our employees, which are on a frequent basis, okay, and managing performance in that way, rather than by just ensuring that they are clocking in and out from 9 to 5. This obviously should also be best practice in performance management also, irrespective of whether they are working or at the office. The second point is around communication that I wanted to raise. During this time, it is very important that we retain open and continuous communication with our employees, which are going to be key in building trust. Okay, we need to ensure that employees know what's expected of them, what they are working towards, and also what priorities they should be focusing on. And this is why we need to communicate constantly with them, setting weekly or even daily targets. Okay, and this is also important to identify any issues or concerns they might have. When employees are at the office, okay, and you're visibly seeing them, you can understand if they have any concerns or issues or sense if something is happening. When employees are working remotely, this is very difficult, and unless you are communicating continuously with them, okay, preferably through video conference, these concerns and issues are difficult to identify. The third aspect is providing support. Okay, the importance, okay, of support and allowing and providing employees opportunities to interact socially is going to be key, because obviously this is going to be things that they're going to be missing most during these times. Okay, so by having regular check-ins with them, even team activities, we've had teams who are also organizing virtual coffee breaks, for example, or lunches, or even celebrating birthdays. Now, trying to keep that team environment also while working at home. It's also important that we encourage our employees to maintain and develop a routine so that they can have a disciplined way of managing their days. Okay, so my suggestion here is that you encourage them or organize, okay, team huddles at the start of the day and the end of the day, which will obviously the objective of them should be, first of all, to understand how they are doing, so how they are adapting to this new way of working, and also if they have any concerns, etc., and have to have a social interaction, but then also to agree on what they should be focusing on during that day, or for them at the end of the day to be reporting on what they've done during that day. The last point, but obviously one of the most important ones, is ensuring their well-being. We don't know for how long this situation may last, and therefore we need to ensure that our teams are not only physically but also mentally healthy during these times. Okay, so one of the things that you could be doing is, for example, making sure that your employees actually have a place within their house where they can replicate their office environment. So having a home office, trying to encourage that meetings are held over video rather than over just over a call, so that you encourage employees to actually, I know these things might seem very frivolous, but they are very important, you know, encouraging to actually get out of bed, have a shower, and sort of wear clothes as if they're going to the office. And also in terms of well-being, there's also the risk of never shutting down. So even those meetings that I said are a good idea to have at the end of the day, those can be used to actually to close off the day, say, okay, now everyone sort of shuts off their laptop, obviously, unless they are choosing to work flexibly, so that we can ensure that that they are actually switching off. Other things some organizations are doing is also encouraging their people, and even team members are doing between themselves, and sharing tips on exercising, and also organizing virtual team exercises. So as I've mentioned, obviously remote working, I think the key is it requires new ways of managing people, and the key here is going to be to balance the need for our employees to be as productive as possible in the circumstances, whilst also ensuring their well-being. Thank you.
Okay, I think linking also with one of the comments that was raised, I think the first part we've discussed relates to remote working, to teleworking. So I'm outlining what needs to be done, in those scenarios where one can work from home. But the truth is that a number of businesses, for a variety of reasons, are facing a situation where the employees can't work from home. And obviously the question that arises are a number. These include, can I just change the working week and reduce it from, the normal 5 or 6 day week to a 2-3 day week? Can I force my employees to go on forced leave? And till when can I take employees onto forced leave? Is it, if this whole situation lasts 2-3 months, what can I do? Issues of probation, for example. Can I extend? Can I have a different measure with regards to probation? If I've just taken on board some new employees and I'm still testing whether these are valid employees or not. Can I extend probationary period in order to be able to assess them? I think these are all, and there are probably going to be a number of questions which I hope you'll start raising in the chat box, which are valid. And Sharon, maybe you can start giving us a bit of a view with regards to these points.
Yes, sure. We have received quite a few queries on whether it is possible for employers to force their employees to take vacation leave, even if it has not yet accrued vacation leave that they would be entitled to throughout this calendar year. As we all know, vacation leave in principle must be availed of on days that are agreed upon by the employer and the employee, obviously taking into account the exigencies of the employer's business. However, the annual leave national standard order provides, besides shutdown, allows employers in special circumstances to force employees to go out on leave and thus make use of their paid vacation leave. However, in order to do this, employees are bound to provide their employees with a written statement and within a reasonable time frame. The law does not provide a time frame within which such a written statement should be provided. It leaves it upon the employers to decide what is a reasonable time before the forced leave starts to run, in which case the employer would need to provide a justification for him to impose such forced leave. It is important to note that such utilization of forced leave does not give rise to a civil debt in favor of the employer should the employee have made excess use of his vacation leave upon his termination of employment. Other queries that we have received were with regard to unpaid leave. So what happens if an employee would have exhausted his full vacation leave, but there is still no work for the employee to carry out, either because the employer's operations have been drastically affected or else because they have been temporarily suspended. The issue of unpaid leave, there seems to be a concept within people in general that by agreement, an employer and an employee can agree to have employees stay at home and be considered as being retained on their books, on the records of the company, but at the same time not receiving any wages. However, the law does not provide for such a possibility. The law only provides for vacation, even we all know all the other types of vacation of leave entitlements, but not unpaid leave. So the position that we have taken is, in such case, resort would need to be made to the famous Section 42. Now everyone is talking about it, of the era, wherein the employer and the employee, if they do agree, would need to ask for approval from the DIR as a temporary measure in order to avoid redundancies. So the context is quite clear. This is in order to avoid having to terminate employees, and it's got to be a temporary measure. And if approval is granted, in such case, such measure would need to be revised every 4 weeks. This is the law. So naturally, I mean, it all depends on the director to decide whether to grant such a measure or not. From what we understand, the director, which has been bombarded with requests lately, has has granted such unpaid leave, but obviously we cannot guarantee what the position will be in future, or whether this will be affected by the measures that have been taken by government as of lately, particularly with the wage supplements. You mentioned, Mark, probation as well, the extension of probation. It makes sense when you have employees on probation. The first thing that would have come to your mind would be to terminate such people on probation, because it's the easiest thing to do. But really and truly, there are employers who would need such workforce to be retained. There are certain sectors where it is quite difficult to find suitable employees, and if you've invested in finding employees and you've managed to locate someone whom you would like to retain, it would make sense to have probation extended, particularly since probation is deemed to be a trial period to see whether it will work out both from the employer and the employee side. And if the employer's operations are not going on, it's hard to assess and evaluate the trial period. In that case, the law provides that probation, as you all might know, is of 6 months duration, right? But in cases where employees are entitled to double the minimum wage and have an executive, administrative, technical, or managerial role, that period can, by agreement, be extended, by agreement with the employees, be extended to up to 1 year. So if that is not the case, that right does not emanate from the law, and as a resort would again need to be made to Section 42, and resorts to asking permission from the director. One would assume, but again, this is an assumption, that the director would find no problem in extending probation in such circumstances, when the employer would easily be able to terminate an employee's employment without having to assign a reason. But then again, we don't know what the position of the director would be in such case. Another measure that employers are looking into are reducing the number of hours. Some employers have resorted to reducing the days, instead of having a 5-day week, to a 2-day week or a 3-day week. It's our advice in such cases was always like, try not to discriminate between employees. Try to find a benchmark, an objective. Like if you have secretaries earning an amount of salary, you could, in that case, like have a reason for which to reduce the salary, the hours of work per week to say to a 3-day week, and then managerial to 2-day week. It's important to have a common benchmark for everyone, to have an objective justification where you decide to opt for such a measure. Reducing the hours would naturally require a variation of the terms and conditions of employment, because in that case, the basis on which employees would be employed would no longer be full-time basis. But on reduced hours, naturally the competent authorities would need to be informed accordingly. And we strongly advise that you would have in place either a letter of variation of terms and conditions recording this change, which would hopefully be temporary. And such reduction in hours would naturally bring about a reduction also in salary, on a pro rata basis, and of the benefits associated with such reduction in hours. I have just received a query whether it is possible for employers to reduce the wages without reducing the hours. There are conflicting views in this respect. While there are some people who argue that it is possible, because as long as you don't go below the minimum wage, then any agreement between the employer and the employee has the force of law. It seems that this might not be the position being taken right now by the director. And for prudence sake, I think it would be best to take the more cautious approach and approach the director when reducing the salary without actually reducing the number of hours. In my view, it would be possible, but for prudence sake, I think it would be best to approach the director before taking such a measure, especially if this is going to affect the majority of the workforce.
So Sharon, just to add on, I mean, I think, and I'm seeing a number of queries coming on from that perspective. When we're speaking about forced leave, there's no requirement to get permission upfront from the department. What there is obviously a requirement to provide the employees with a written statement setting out the reasons why the forced leave is being imposed.
Yes,
The question, obviously, and we need to be a bit more short in our replies, is obviously we're speaking about forced leave, so we're speaking about a finite amount of days that one can benefit. The issue remains unpaid leave. What's your views from that perspective?
Exactly. I mean, with regard to forced leave, no, the law is quite clear. Section 4A provides that forced leave can like be imposed without having to. It doesn't say that you don't have to go to the director, but it doesn't provide a necessity to have to get the approval of the director. While Section 42 of the ERA expressly provides so. After having exhausted the vacation leave, the next natural step would seem to be going on to the unpaid leave. But as I said, the law does not provide for unpaid leave. So to resort to unpaid leave rather than having to go for the inevitable redundancies, it is necessary to go to the director in that case. I'm not sure whether I've answered
okay, very good. I think just to keep on a bit on this subject and obviously relating point, I think what you're saying is also employers having to be a bit more innovative. You know, necessity is the mother of invention, and to a certain extent, what you'd find is that maybe you have a situation where certain type of jobs are not necessarily in demand at the moment within the same company, but for example, deliveries and delivery men, and from that perspective, are assuming more relevance. So if an employer wants to shift and change the role of an employee and the duties of an employee, is there anything that needs to be done, any notification to the department?
Well, notification to the department, not to the director, but if the parties agree to a change in the duties, then by all means, they are only free to do so. Yes, but unless there is a change in the role, only duties that are compatible with the position can be delegated to an employee. Other than that, I mean, if I'm an office clerk and all of a sudden I'm being asked to effect deliveries, then that is quite a difference in the role, and there would need to be a specific agreement.
Agreed. Okay, so just to also start going into some of the questions that have been coming on. Berta, there are a few questions relating to quarantine leave. Maybe you can address them quickly.
Yes, Mark. So one question related to whether an eventual lockdown could be termed as quarantine leave. As yet, I would say it is not, in the sense the definition of quarantine is very generic. So if there is an order to stay home, then that would be quarantine leave. However, at this point in time, lockdown has not been declared. So at this point in time, there is no order for an official lockdown. So at this point in time, I would say that no. What possibly could be done if there is an eventual lockdown? I'm assuming that there'll be some other legislation in place, some legal notice, which would either put lockdown within the definition of quarantine leave or regulate it in a different way. So I think there'll be eventually some form of legislation. Just to link this to that, to the quarantine grant, although again, it's not really the purpose of today to discuss this in detail. However, the quarantine grant form lists the circumstances when one can claim it. And at this point, there are a number of reasons. One of them, so there are the reasons if you've traveled on a certain day and all that. One of them is if you've been ordered to stay in quarantine by the health authorities. So the generic one. As yet, there's no order for lockdown. So as yet, I would say it wouldn't fall. Obviously, when there is, that's another story. Okay, moving on to, we've had a number of comments regarding, so quarantine leave, but the employee can actually work from home. I mean, for me, if quarantine leave is not self-isolation, so the person has not been found to be unwell, and the person might probably very likely is fit and healthy. So I would feel uncomfortable to say that the employee can refuse to work remotely if this is a possibility and if this is requested by the employer to do so. So if the employee could work remotely, I would feel uncomfortable that the employee actually says that he can't do that because he is not unwell, so he's not on sick leave. Fine, he's on quarantine leave, but if he's fit and healthy, I don't see why he cannot work from home. That would be my view. Again, the legislation does not specifically deal with this issue. So one would need to look into it a bit more, but I would say it would be difficult to argue that the employee can refuse to work. And another question we've had is about asking for proof of quarantine. So one question is, can we ask for a medical certificate? The law does not specify what kind of evidence the employer can request. So an employer can request any evidence which for him would show that the quarantine is actually effective. If that is going to be, as I said, it could be perhaps a copy of the written order. Or possibly a medical certificate if that is something that the employer would like to have. I mean, there might be some difficulties in actually getting it if doctors would not want to visit a person who's on quarantine. But in practice, this could be requested. So in practice, the employee should provide the evidence as is requested by the employer. And to link onto this, even the actual claim form for the quarantine grant makes a sort of tick the box by the employer. So the employer needs to declare that he has made all possible verifications to ensure that his employees are on quarantine. So obviously the employer is actually obliged to ask for the proof that he feels would mostly prove this point.
Thank you, Berta. I think I would add on to yours, to your point, is that what we're hearing is that there probably will be continuous measures of lockdown, and if you look at the current forms which are available on the Malta Enterprise website, it doesn't seem to cover those areas which have already been hit by some sort of a lockdown. So it's more a quarantine issue. At the end of the day, it remains also an application. So it's I think the proof is in the pudding. So at the end of the day, it's a question of submitting these forms. That doesn't seem to be very burdensome forms, and apply for those. The benefit will, or at least the money will initially always go to the employers from that perspective. Moving on, even in the interest of time and the last sort of 15 minutes, Sharon, there were also some queries relating to the teleworking aspect. And again, before you go in, I think the point I want to address is the same, that again, it's an online form where there are interpretational issues or concerns. Can you say there wasn't a teleworking arrangement, even though the employer had provided some flexibility in the past? I don't know, he had, as we said, maybe a cousin who he had occasionally allowed to work from home. Does that mean that now the employer is precluded from qualifying? in my mind, there's still a question mark. So my suggestion would always be to apply and push for that benefit. That being said, Sharon, can you take us through the queries that came in?
Yes. Yes, one of the queries was whether there was any restriction with regard to undertakings which are eligible to apply for the teleworking scheme, the aid. Now, in terms of the Malta Enterprise Information provided, the call is open to all undertakings, irrespective of size and sector. And I'm reading now from the Malta Enterprise Information provided. Another query was what would happen if there is no teleworking arrangement in place. As I explained, the agreement is required independently of the scheme. To be able to apply for the scheme, you need to have the agreement in place, and it needs to be dated not earlier than the 15th of February. But even if you're not applying and knowing the extent of people making use of this arrangement, it makes sense to have the conditions in place. But if you do not have it, if you're not going to have the agreement in place, the National Standard Order does not provide for specific sanctions like it does, elsewhere, and other laws do elsewhere. However, that would mean to be a breach of employment terms and conditions. And if a report is made to the director can investigate the allegation and take action accordingly. To note that action by the DIR is of criminal nature. That's it from my end, Mark.
Sorry, I was unmuting my microphone. I mean, it seems we didn't get many questions, and I'm not too sort of quite expected with regards to data protection and confidentiality. I'd like to stress the point that the penalties and the fines are major. So the businesses and the employers are already going through a tough time. All you need is the cherry on top, which is these fines coming out from a GDPR, from a confidentiality perspective. So the focus on ensuring that the procedures you have in place with regards to confidentiality, with data protection, are in line with these measures. I mean, you start hearing of, as we said, the people are not going to the office, but the mail is going to the office. So secretaries are opening it and circulating it. Is it being seen by someone who shouldn't have access to that information? If the answer is that yes, then there's a risk that unless you've put in the policies properly, that one could eventually be fined from that perspective. So in my mind, these non-employee, strictly employee or employment law issues are still very, very relevant. However, there are other considerations that need to be done from a workforce perspective. Claudine, can you mention a couple, maybe?
Thanks, Mark. Yes, obviously during these challenging times, the key aspect is going to be, on one hand, balancing the duty of care we have to employee well-being with obviously the business needs, okay? And never as much as during this time have organizations needed to have a strong HR function as well as strong leaders. I've already spoken about obviously what we need to do in terms of supporting our employees through remote working, but there are obviously other scenarios which businesses are facing. The first one is ensuring business continuity, okay? Even for those businesses still in operation, not everyone can work remotely, okay? And for some sectors, this means that people still need to go to work, and therefore what we need to be doing is adopting workplace measures to continue running our operations while obviously minimizing the risks of the spread of the virus. And what can we be doing in this case? The first one is splitting team arrangements, okay, to avoid the risk of infection between teams. Remember that probably if you get one person, okay, on a team who is infected, the rest will be put into quarantine, okay? So ways you can do this is through, for example, physical segregation, okay? If you have one call center at the moment, you need to split that into two sites to minimize your risk. Or, for example, having two separate teams working different shifts and different days. For example, if you're still operating a warehouse, if you're in the food and beverage business, then it's a good idea to have one team, okay, and another one that is as a contingency, okay, or working at the same time and keeping them segregated. Obviously, the obvious one is also safeguarding the safety of your employees through, for example, things like temperature checking, making sure they're distanced from themselves and also from the customers, increasing hygiene and also providing protective clothing. Another key aspect is having contingency plans for critical roles. So have you identified critical roles within your organizations that will be required to ensure business continuity and have people lined up and trained who can take over in these critical roles who might be infected? Okay, so these were all aspects on business continuity. Another point I wanted to make is balancing cost reduction measures with talent management. There are obviously some businesses who are shut down or who are experiencing significant losses, and also notwithstanding the measures introduced by government, may be thinking of some cost reduction measures related to their people, such as redundancies, for example. Okay, one of the key learnings from the financial crisis has been really difficulty to rehire the same staff, okay, once a company is back on track. In addition to this, obviously, there are the costs of hiring and training, and also higher costs for the brand and also for your employee proposition. So my suggestion to you is, yes, think of cost reduction measures, but don't only think of them from a financial perspective. Also think of what your talent management needs are going to be in the long term, once hopefully all this is over and your business is back on track. Another key thing is the need for transparency and communication, and also how you are going to utilize the time of your employees. Okay, in cases where businesses are shut down or you have employees who are underutilized, this is the time, okay, where you can be really using that time for internal projects that you've been putting on hold, okay, for a number of time. Things like, for example, developing standard operating procedures, policies, coming up with innovative products or services for your companies, re-engineering processes through digital transformation. Okay, so all these things that you've been putting on hold can now be carried out. Another important aspect that could be tackled during this time and taking it as an opportunity is upskilling. Before this crisis happened, CEOs have been telling us that their biggest worry is the availability of skills, okay, within their organization, whether these are digital skills, data skills, or even human skills, okay? So obviously you might be thinking, but if we are trying to reduce our costs, how can we invest in upskilling, okay? And there are different ways you can do this. You can even utilize your internal resources to develop the content and deliver the training. But even if you are going to engage external parties or acquire e-learns or digital learning, okay, I encourage you to think of upskilling more as sort of building the human capital element of your balance sheet rather than looking at it as an expense, okay? So this trying to make the best use of the time that we have. I think the key thing is going to be to have an adaptable workforce. We cannot have people saying, okay, but that is not part of my job, you know, when we're asking them to change their roles. And the only way you're going to manage to do this is if you are communicating with your people and making them understand that this is something that is really a need for the organization and for their benefit at the end of the day. So these were obviously just some generic guidelines, okay, from things we know that our clients are facing. Obviously, each organization has its own circumstances and considerations, but hopefully they give you some general insight of those things that you need to be thinking on in this time in order to, first of all, protect your people, and secondly, to be as productive as possible in this time of crisis. So that's it from me. Thanks.
Thank you, Claudine. And that brings us almost bang on time at 5:30, and we can now leave the space for Chris Fenn to continue with his press conference. I think just as a takeaway point from my end, what I hope this hour and a half has shown is that we are dealing obviously with probably Malta's main resource, which is human beings, whether it's tourism or us individuals who are, running the work, the jobs, the professions and all that. And when you're dealing with these matters, there's a lot of uncertainty which arises, questions relating to these aspects, which unfortunately or fortunately, we had not been envisaging before and we hadn't been sort of prepared. There is obviously going to be a number of developments, at least that's what I expect, and a number of policies coming out, or at least guidelines, to highlight and help interpret these measures. But I think the key point is discuss. So as much as possible, one should discuss the specific queries to ensure that they are doing the right thing, both in the interest of them, their jobs, and also the interest of the employees, finding that balance between the common good for the employees and sometimes the employees at large, and also the business, is obviously going to be something which is difficult. Once again, I thank you for listening in. We have also taken note of your questions, and we will try as much as possible to reach out and answer those which we did not have the time. However, again, if there are any other aspects which you would like to discuss, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to continue this discussion. Thank you very much from my end and good evening.